everybody. This is Dr. Vanessa Ament, and today's guest is Annie Taylor, Foley Editor at Alchemy Post Sound in Peekskill, which is upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And Annie studied sound design at the Savannah College of Art and Design, which we warmly call SCAD. And she offers a unique perspective of studying at one of the best sound design programs in the United States, and then getting a coveted internship at Alchemy Post Sound and earning a spot as an editor in a competitive market. So welcome, Annie. I'm really excited about talking to you this evening, which will...
Thank you.
Yeah, this is exciting because we met when you had just finished at SCAD. And of course, I know people at SCAD, and I had done some Foley workshops and done some videos for the second edition of the Foley Grail at SCAD. So I want to get started first talking about how you got involved taking the sound design program at SCAD, because I think you're from Clovis, California, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So what made you decide that you wanted to study sound at SCAD?
Well, I had just graduated from my film bachelor's, which was at Cal State Monterey Bay, and I had a lovely time there. I learned so much, but I wanted more. And I had this kind of idea in my mind that maybe I would get a master's and teach at a university and go that route. But while I was getting the master's at SCAD, I was like, oh, you know what? I think I should do Foley full time. Like, this is actually really, really interesting and really fun. Um, and I chose SCAD because in my research, it was the only place I could find in the States that had a sound design master's program. And that's something that I was really interested in. I know some people will get associate's degrees or go to sound design for music, but I was like, no, it's got to be film. It's got to
Yeah.
be a master's. And so it's got to be SCAD. That was kind of my reasoning behind it. And I was lucky enough to apply and get in.
Doesn't it surprise you? I know it does me, because when I started getting into academia after being a Foley artist for almost 3 decades, and an editor and a voice person and a composer and all the things I did in entertainment, I was shocked in the early 2000s how few programs there were in film sound. It's still true, Annie. Didn't it
Hmm.
shock you how few
Yeah.
programs there were, and pardon me, but are
Hmm.
in film
It
sound?
did. It was
And
very
SCAD is
surprising.
still one of the very best, with
Hmm.
excellent faculty and a wonderful curriculum that's very well ordered and programmed. And the students that come out of there are really well prepared. Does that surprise
Oh,
you that there
yeah.
are so few?
It does surprise me that there are so few. It doesn't surprise me that SCAD, I mean, leads the pack in the few, but there are so many opportunities for universities to implement a sound program into their curriculum, and I feel like it's just underutilized because I think that there's an interest for it. I think that once people kind of get themselves rolling and figure out like, oh, okay, this is a whole world of sound. It's not just sound effects, there's dialogue, there's music, there's Foley. There's so many opportunities for students to learn and grow and, gather information through all these different aspects of sound.
It's interesting to me. I fight the battle on two ends, being in so many organizations in Hollywood about film sound, and I'm also in composing organizations, being a member of BMI and in the Society of Composers and Lyricists, and as an ASMAC, and I write music, and I've written a musical, and I write jazz, and then I'm in MIPSI, and I was in the Editors Guild, and I'm in CAS. There's this attitude, and it's odd, in the academic world that you just sort of paint on a little bit of sound and they don't really need the full comprehensive understanding of sound, that it's
Hmm.
just learning a little bit of tech and you just need a guy to teach them tech. And that still goes on. And I'm always shocked when I do the judging for the internships for the Television Academy. I'm still getting amazing, because I do it in music and script and, like drama scripts and then sound. And the music composition has amazing detail in their applications. and the script writing does. And then you get to sound, and it's like they think if they take one class and it's in a radio program or they play guitar, or I'm shocked that they still, it's SCAD and some of the schools in LA. That's it.
Berkeley College of Music is
Yeah,
good, but again, it's
but
the College
other
of Music.
schools, and I won't say their names because I don't want to embarrass them. They have nothing. And I rail about it and rail about it. And the thing that always shocks me is the attitude in the industry as well. You know, that's kind of cool because then they have to come out here and learn it. And I go, it's not cool because we're still having ignorance about film sound everywhere. And I'm still writing about it academically in books and chapters and handbooks. And the other side of it is that the academic world doesn't value sound as a really integral part of filmmaking. Then in the professional side, you get movies being made where they use the term soundtrack and they mean the music. They don't mean the comprehensive integration of music and sound. One of your professors, Dave Stone, who is, you know, very close to me, he and I talk about this all the time because we're still trying to educate people, and it drives us crazy that we're still fighting the same battle we were fighting 20 years ago when we entered into academia. I do find it shocking that SCAD is still probably the leader and that we still can't get other schools to catch up. So I'm glad that you went to such an excellent one. I think it's a wonderful program. So you left that program, and I remember when you first came out, because I met you when you first left it, and you'd gotten this wonderful internship at Alchemy, and I knew the people there, and they are wonderful people. It's a great place.
We had actually met slightly before I got the internship when I went to the MPSEs for the first time.
Yes, but I remember
And
that you were about to go.
yes, I was nominated for a student award from SCAD.
Right.
And I remember I was going around to all these different tables and talking to all these professionals, being like, oh, I have this internship opportunity at Alchemy. I don't know if I'm going to get it yet. I don't know what I'm going to do. And everybody just had so many good things to say about Alchemy that I was like, okay, I feel really good about getting this internship now.
So I had met them. I had met Leslie and Andrea when I had included them in on my short that I'd done on a fellowship when I was the endowed chair at Ball State with students that I will someday go back into and expand and do more shooting and turn into a feature about women in film sound. And I was very impressed with their collegial way of working rather than the competitive way, which I think is the norm in LA. There is a family-like supportive atmosphere there that is quite unusual. And I said that at the time. And I included it when I discussed it in the third edition of the Foley Grail, when I had a complete area just about the way Alchemy sound works, because it's so unique. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, because you got your internship and then you became a Foley editor. And I know you did a brief stint as a Foley artist, but went back to being a Foley editor. So what I'd like for you to discuss in methodological and theoretical way, because this is what's special, I think, about Alchemy. And I say this as someone who started out in 1980 in Hollywood, so I'm a Hollywood person. But I have written about the Bay Area, and I did work in the Bay Area for several years. So I know the Bay Area style and zeitgeist from the cultural geographical way that it works. And then I know New York from all the people I know that work there and talking to people, but I never worked there. And then I've talked to people in Austin, and I know Chicago pretty well because I lived there for several years. And then I know Atlanta because I worked there and lived there. What would you say is the reason that there's such a different collectivism of cooperation and support at Alchemy that is so different from most post houses?
I've been trying to figure out the same question on what makes us different, what makes us successful. And because this is my first, I interned here and now I work full time there, I haven't really worked at other studios. I've only interviewed at them. And from what I can gather, And from the sessions that we've received from other studios that are like, oh, we want it to sound like this, and here's the session from that movie. And we look at it and we're like, huh, okay, this sounds really good. I think we can do this a little better, or I think we could take a little note from this and implement it into our Foley. And my coworker Nick and I, who is another editor who trained me, he is constantly trying to get us to the core of like why we do this, because it can be tedious, it can be very like, you know, you get zoned in and you're looking at the screen all day, but we just love it. And we love taking the time and paying attention to detail. That's something that I think Alchemy does very well, is our detail work. When Joanna Fang used to work for us, we said we had the best hands in the business because she just has such an artful way of working with her hands and doing all those skin cues.
Mhm.
And we love to get into that detail and into that texture of different films. And sometimes we listen to work from other studios and we're like, oh man, I wish there was some dust on the ground there, or, you know, any something like that.
Right.
They can be very minor, and sometimes it's like, oh yeah, we knocked this one out of the park. Like, you know, take that C5. You know, we would we never say things like that, but
Which is a really
you know,
great sound house.
they're incredible. That's
Wonderful.
actually who I wanted to work for before I started working at Alchemy. Is I really wanted to work at C5 because I knew Marco and George were like top of the
They're
line
wonderful.
guys. I was
They're
like,
wonderful.
yeah, if I could get trained by Marco, I've got it. And when I
And
went to
JPEG
do,
is also really good. And then Rachel
yeah,
Chansey, who I spoke with, who I've known, is also very excellent. New York has some really wonderful artists.
truly, yes. And I knew that I had to make a choice between Los Angeles and New York when I was graduating from grad school, because I could either go home or I could try and make something of myself in New York, which I know sounds corny, but it really was how I wanted to do things. And I knew I didn't want to work in the city because I'm just not a city gal.
Mhm.
And I was like, I had this whole plan. I was gonna, you know, work at C5 so I could live in New Jersey and still get the New York jobs. And then when I went to do all of my interviews, of course, nothing ever goes to plan. And Marco pitched Alchemy once again. And I had already sent them an email, didn't get a response quite yet. But after Marco was like, oh, you know, why don't you try Alchemy again? And why don't you throw my name in there? That I was like, yes, bingo, I got it. I got the name drop, I got the interview. And that's all it took for me, is like, I just needed to get myself out there
Yeah.
and meet the right people. And Liz and Andrea, it really is like a family. So, you know, they welcomed me into their family, and it's just been great ever since.
You know, I've been around and there is something very different. And I say this in the book, the third edition of the Holy Grail. I say it, I really feature alchemy for a reason. It's because I have been around so much and I do know so many people. When you find an organization that chooses to put cooperation ahead of competition and nurture each other's growth and loyalty, it's so unique and special. There are places I felt that way when I worked at Fantasy Salzance in the Bay Area. When I was there for 2 years in the Bay Area, I felt very much that way there. And it was really special and delightful. And those 2 years that I did films there, I felt that way, felt very supported. And there were some wonderful people there. I got to work with Alan Splatt and I got to work with Doug Murray, who I still adore. And Roy Siegel ran it, and Steve Shirts was his second in command. And I think the whole Salzance world was like that. And he was a New Yorker. I can't say that this is true across the board, but I think as I studied the geographical scenes for my book, Divergent Tracks, which was looking at going from analog to digital sound editing using the cultural geography lens of New York, LA, and the Bay Area, rather than talking about it I talked about technology, but I was really using the lens of the way that the filmmaking style and workflow and aesthetics were different, and the people were different, and the kind of films made were different, all of that. New York, the Bay Area, LA, they're different. And I'm an Angelino, but I did work in the Bay Area and I knew people in New York, and I really looked at how it was different. And this is where, when you study academically and you look through a different lens, you look for different ways of viewing things. I noticed the Hollywood world is so different from the Bay Area and from New York. New York does have a more close-knit way of looking at working together on film. And I think some of that is that there's a literary and real world storytelling and theater history, which is more cast and coming together world way of looking at the world. When you come from literary and real stories and theater, which are coming together and working as a group, it's a different way of looking at things than the way Hollywood did things, or the way the Bay Area, which was documentary and experimental film. And so you just end up having a different way of thinking about how you work. And Saul Zaentz came from New York and was a music producer. And so his way of looking at the world was different. And he was coming out to documentary and experimental film and public television. And it was just a different way of putting things together. Whenever I talk to New York film people, there is a smaller group of people that work with the same people all the time. And it's a different way of working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I
we
really like it.
studios. Yeah, we see the same names on email chains all the time, and I love it because then it's like, oh, great, we got a job from them again, and now I get to email like it's an old friend,
Yeah.
and it helps the communication go so much more smoothly. You know, when we have our creative meetings before we start working on the project, it's like, oh, hey, how's it going? How are the kids? How was your summer? And then we get into, the what we're going to do for the movie, and they can candidly discuss our strengths and be like, we know that your live room is really good and we want you to use your live room on this movie. And yeah, there's a great relationship, there's a camaraderie, and we all want to make this movie really good or this show really good. And I think everybody they get that. It's like, we're not fighting against each other. We might be fighting against the budget, but we're not fighting each other.
And I guess that adds to a sense of stability.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it adds a sense of safety almost, where it's like if S is really hitting the fan and I have to make a call to a client, it's a little less intimidating. It's still intimidating, but a little less so if I can be like, hey, sorry, this is what's going on and here's how we'll fix it. And this is, how can we work with you and your schedule? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. You know what? That's fine. Deliver it tomorrow morning and we'll be okay. And it's like, whew, thank God. I don't know if I would get that necessarily if I worked in a big pond per se.
Right. Well, yeah, I can tell you, um, it's very different in Hollywood. And there were some things I really love about working in LA because I am so much of an Angelino, but I never felt like that. I would not say safety is the feeling. I want to ask you
Okay.
about The Bear, and I'll tell you why. I recently started watching it. The first episode made me very nervous because I'm not somebody that likes chaos. I don't respond well to a chaotic atmosphere. I'm a very planned person that likes to think things through.
Mhm.
And that first episode made me so nervous. I thought, I don't know why people think this is a good show. I never want to look at it again. It took me a month to go to episode 2. And now, of course, I'm hooked because I really like the psychology and the juxtaposition of the thoroughly dysfunctional, crazy, yelling, screaming family, which makes me very nervous because I did not grow up in a family like that. And the fine refinement of high culinary art, which does appeal to me because I am someone who really likes the fine refinement and specificity of high art. So, talk to me about one of your golden reels and working on The Bear and how a Chicago show ends up getting its sound done in upstate New York.
Well, I gotta say, we had when we first screened we saw episode two first because we didn't work on the pilot. But when we first saw episode two, we had the same reaction. We were like, oh my God, this show is crazy. And we were, Leslie's kind of the same. He was like, I can't watch this show. It gives me high blood pressure. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. I had the same feeling when I watched Uncut Gems with Adam Sandler. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is a loud, chaotic movie. There's a lot going on. Oh man, the M&E for this is going to be terrible. And a lot of what we did was just trying to replicate that energy because, we did have to do it we had to do an M&E. And, if these guys are going to be dubbed into Spanish and there's going to be yelling at the same intensity, then that whisk has to be thrown down at the same intensity. And but then also that steak needs to be placed on with the same tenderness and care. And that was definitely a challenge. As an artist, you can go from, hard hits all day, and then when you have to like throw in a soft thing in between all of that, it's definitely difficult. So we worked a lot with texture and I tried to work with like a little teeny tiny bit of pre-mixing as I was editing just to kind of help things fit a little better. And Steve Major was the one who mixed it, and so I was like, "All right, Major, I'm gonna lower this one down and bring this one up so that you know that this is the one I want to hear, and like this one is just for the layers." And so I would try and finagle things a little bit like that, but it was really about let's get these textures right, let's get this food sound right. And so while I was queuing, um, we made the decision to like name all of the foods and to try and be as specific as we could. And then at the end of my queue session, I would have a grocery list that I would give to our studio manager. He would go out, do a bunch of shopping, and then come back with hopefully all of the right sounds for this television show. And it was a lot of fun and very messy. And I learned so much about food and restaurants and all these things I would have never imagined to be learning about in my job, which was great.
So how long would you take to work on one of the episodes? Because I think they're only half-hour shows, aren't they?
Yeah, it was a very quick turnaround. I'm trying to remember the specifics, but it was either a day and a half or 2 days. And
Oh.
the way that our studio works is it's tripled. So, 2 days to queue, 2 days to shoot, 2 days to edit. But I believe we were on maybe a day, day and a half, a day plus Russell, things like that. So it was a very tight turnaround. We'd do about one episode a week and you know, get them out the door, hand chef, let's get this thing out of here. And we would, trying our best to uh, get these things done and really make them shine because Les is all about quality over quantity. He never wants us to get complacent and he never wants us to feel like we've done enough and then just send it out.
Mhm.
So it's always a matter of like, step back, take another look at it, see what you can change, see what you can do better. You know, if there's a pickup, call for a pickup. If you can cut something in, cut something in. And, let's make this thing really, really good. And when you get these shows, you never know what's going to be popular. And so you have to treat everything like it's going to be the most popular show that you're working on that year. And luckily, The Bear actually was one of the most popular shows we worked on that year. So it was like the hard work definitely paid off.
What would you say was the most surprising thing you discovered once you left being a student to being an intern? And then I'm going to ask the same question about being an intern to being an editor that had to be accountable.
Mm. I would say from student to internship, the there was definitely I like had a wall hit into my face of how skilled people were. That like I knew I was green and that I had a lot of learning to do. But I didn't expect it to feel so daunting when I first got into my internship interviews. And, people would, during the interview, ask me to do things, walk some steps or cut something or run the mixing board. And, watching a professional do their job and then having to like squeeze in there as a student, it was so intimidating when I was first starting out. And so it took me a little while to like really find my footing as an intern and feel like I wasn't stepping on anybody's toes or that I wasn't in the way. I really tried to just be as helpful and like present as I possibly could. I'm like, I'm not going to let you forget about me. Yeah, I'm not just going to stand in the corner the whole time. Like, if I can jump in front of the mic, that's what I'm going to do. And, then Ryan, who was usually the mixer for myself and Les, you know, over the talk back, being like, nope, do it again. Nope, too
Ryan
loud.
Colson,
Nope, too
you're
soft.
talking about Ryan Colson,
I did, yes.
who is
And
wonderful. He's a wonderful
he's
mixer and a
so great.
wonderful human.
Yes, I learned so much from Ryan, from behind the glass and from,
In
just
editing.
talking to
Yeah, he's just a wonderful man.
him. So it was hard to kind of get over my ego per se of like feeling like I did something well and then hearing the other perspective for the guy who actually knows what it's going to sound like being like no it doesn't sound right, being like what, that was the best take I've ever done, I'll never get it better than that. And he's like nope, too loud, too soft, too tappy, too clacky, whatever it might be. And having to like step back, take a breath, and then do it again and try and apply the note was so difficult. And it felt difficult because we're on a time schedule and time is money. And like that's something that's not really in my mind when I was a student, that like all the hours I spend on this costs somebody else a certain amount of money.
Hmm.
So that was definitely a perspective shift of like, okay, I realize that I need to take my time on this, but I need to also get it right so that I can get faster next time. And we always preach that, like, we want you to have the skill and the detail and get to our level of quality first before you can do it all in a day. And that was kind of my process as an intern, was like learning to do it right, learning to have it meet the standards that Alchemy provides, and then doing it all very quickly.
One of the things I want to say about you when I met you that night at MIPSI, the Golden Reels, I was interested in you that night because you were clearly an intellectual, clearly interested in the art and the craft. I found you to be humble. I was more interested in you because you were interested in what was going on around you, and you were interested in alchemy sound. And I knew about alchemy. So I was always going to follow you because of what you were interested in. And there's a lesson there about what I look for in people, Annie. And
Mhm.
there's a lesson there for other people watching this podcast. I want to ask you about the other golden reel and tell us what
Sure.
that's for.
This one is for Prey, which is in the Predator franchise. So
Mm.
it's like a prequel to the first couple of movies, which I've only seen snippets of for research.
So I only know about Predator, the one that Dave and I worked on in 1987. Tell me about this other Predator franchise.
This one takes place in pre-colonial America, or colonial America, like 1780s or so. And it is it follows the story of a Comanche woman who wants to be a warrior, but her tribe's culture dictates that she isn't fit to be one. And when she encounters the predator, who, is this alien who
Right.
kills for sport, and, all she wants to do is be a hunter, it's this perfect opportunity for her to slay this beast. And we had so much fun combining the really natural elements of like the native tomahawks and their twine and beads on their outfits and all of those things. And then switching over to the Predator, who is metal and he's got, crazy arm blades and he's got, weird skin and armor on. And we worked really closely with Chris Terhune, who was the supervisor for that job. And he really wanted us to approach it from like a hot and cold aspect. Like the Comanche tribe is raw and natural. A lot of them aren't wearing shirts, so a lot of skin was going on. And then the Predator, who's like sci-fi futuristic, we really wanted to enhance the difference in technology between what the Predator is using and what the Comanche were using. And then throughout the movie, you see other people like the French, and they have their flintlock pistols and
Huh.
all that, and their fur boots and their big hats and all that stuff. So it was like going
Interesting to
through
me because
different eras.
having done the original Predator, what they've done is take that concept and then zip it across these several decades into something that's really relevant to what we relate to now, with especially the superhero franchises, and they've really teched it up. So they've taken the idea from the original Predator that we
Hmm.
did in 87 with Schwarzenegger, which was a really interesting Predator that had the invisible person going through the jungle, and then the goopy gloppy one that then was techno with all the gadgets on the arms. So we did all three versions. And now they've done this super tech guy that you're discussing. And I'm fascinated when they do things like that.
Hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the original Predator, I believe it was kind of like, you know, brawn wins, that they were able to fight back the Predator. And in Prey, it's very much a brains wins.
Actually, no, the way that
No?
Schwarzenegger outsmarts the Predator by realizing the Predator cannot see with his supervision if he's covered in mud.
Well, there you go.
He
That's a
covers
good.
himself in mud. By being in the
Mhm.
water, he covers in mud, and the Predator, with his vision, his special vision, cannot see him under the mud. So it's actually realizing that the Predator can't see through mud. So it's actually
That
figuring out something smart.
that's a great um parallel,
Really good
because
movie.
I don't want to give away too much of the plot for Prey, but I will say that Naru, our main character, does have to outsmart the Predator with mud. So that is a great little tie line between the two movies, that it's like, ah, yes, the
Yes.
mud, that'll get him.
I think the lesson, and this might be kind of an interesting way to tie this all up, is everything old is new again. Um,
Yes.
they've repurposed the original storyline, changed the protagonist to a female, updated the technology, but used the very basic organic way of winning. That even technology cannot befuddle something as organic as wet earth.
Yeah.
You know,
Everything goes back to the earth, I guess.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. So everything old is new again, which is kind of an interesting lesson in our stage of overdetermination with technology and the ever perplexing world of how far do we go with AI, which is kind
Hmm.
of an interesting way to end our discussion here as we ponder how AI affects Foley, because I have my own thoughts on that, which is it's kind of a moot discussion because people will try it and some people are going to be afraid of it. I personally, Rachel Chansey discussed this a little bit in my interview with her. She's a New Yorker. Um, People are going to think that AI is going to be able to do Foley, but Foley, by its very nature, is an organic performance of acting. So
Hmm.
to think, I mean, we're always going to be people that want to get rid of human labor and replace it with technology. And it's something that I philosophically have a problem with. um, Rachel said something I thought was very interesting. Why replace people with something that people can do? Have AI do things that people shouldn't do.
Yeah, I totally agree with
Like
her and
like
with you. Mhm.
like not not death, like disarm bombs. So this capitalistic notion that we should replace human labor with AI is something that I'm just philosophically against. But of course, in our society, they never stop trying to devalue human labor.
Of
So when it
course.
comes to the whole notion of where is Foley headed, it's a philosophical question.
Yeah.
And if you ask the true thinkers about it, they're going to come up with different answers. But my answer would be capitalism's always going to try to find a way to replace labor.
Hmm.
And there are certain things that human beings are always going to do better than machines, no matter what capitalists try to do. That
Yeah.
would be my
My
answer. What would
thoughts
you choose?
my thoughts on AI is that I think it poses a I don't think it poses a threat to Foley artists because I think that, like you said, it would completely nullify the whole point of why we even have Foley artists because they want that human element. They want a person to see the picture, interpret it, and make the sound. I do see it as a threat to Foley editors because I can imagine a software that reads the picture, sees where the heel touches the ground, and puts the transient there. That might be completely out of left field for the people who program these things, but that's the type of
Will
thing that
it
I see.
sound?
That,
But I'm
yeah.
going to go back to what one of my favorite people ever said, Bob Rutledge, who you never knew, who was a brilliant sound editor and Foley artist, who said, "You can't cut feel.
Hmm. I completely agree with that.
You can't
I studied
cut
Walter Murch
feel.
in school, and he always Walter Murch always says, like, go for the feeling first,
You
worry
can't cut
about the
feel."
sync later.
So AI will never understand feel. So this is why I just get humored by this never-ending discussion. It's like, okay, keep going, folks, keep having the discussion, but you can't cut feel.
Hmm. I do wonder if it'll end up being. I see, posts about how people have been complaining about the previous generation since the beginning of
I
generations, and that we have ancient stone tablets of, people being like, ah, kids these days, they're writing on papyrus and they won't know the feel of a real stone chisel. Society's crumbling. And sometimes I wonder if I'm being that guy with the chisel. If I'm like, oh man, the technology is going to ruin this and we won't get the same performance and we won't things won't be the same. And it does scare me. And sometimes I wonder if that is how it's going to be. And that's what I'm going to have to adapt to if I'm going to have to write on papyrus at some point.
This has been wonderful. What a joy
Yes,
to
thank you so
speak with you,
much.
Annie. I'm so glad you agreed to have this discussion. This has been Annie Taylor, who I am so glad I got to speak with from the moment I met her at a Golden Reel MIPSI meeting right before the pandemic in 2020. I knew I
Mhm.
was going to want to meet with her again. I have featured Alchemy Post Sound in the third edition of the Foley Grail, but it'll never be enough because it's a very special place. And Annie is a very special woman. And I hope to speak with you more in the future. And thank you so much for being with us here
Thank
on
you so much for having me.
Holy Foley.
Yes, holy foley on.